по-корейски, просто поскольку это, видимо, единственный язык, который хотя бы в определенной степени нас объединяет. Я понимаю, что, возможно, не все на казахстанской стороне могут свободно понимать по-корейски, и опять-таки с русским языком могут быть на корейской стороне проблемы, поэтому я вынужден говорить по-английски. Я бы хотел как-нибудь по-другому, к сожалению, выхода тут нет. So I'm going now to try to summarize the history of Russophone Koreans of Eurasia, not from a viewpoint of an insider, a person inside the community, or a historian who mostly works on Soviet, pre-Soviet, post-Soviet Koreans history. What I'm trying to do now is to summarize the history of Eurasian Russophone Koreans in a way which would show why this history is also extremely fascinating, interesting, and significant to the outsiders. What is the global significance of Soviet and post-Soviet Koreans history? What does it teach us about the dynamic of diasporic living? And what does it teach us about the general dynamics of Korean diasporic trajectories? So I will try to do a comparativist presentation comparing Russophone Koreans history with the histories of other modern Korean diasporas and attempting to extract the significance of Russophone Koreans history inside the framework of this comparison. The first thing that I wanted to mention is that Korean migration to what became Russian territory in 1816. We should again remember that when we say Russian Far East, well, it's basically a result of colonial expansion. It was not Russian. Before Russia squeezed this territory out of declining its empire. So the Korean migration to what became Russian territory after 1860 was a pioneering enterprise when it comes to its timing. Official beginning of Korean migration to Russian territory was 1864. In reality, however, we know that the first Korean families started to cross the border river Tumangan and move into Russian territory already from around 1860. Well, that's basically the first such cross-border move in the modern history of Korean diasporas. The next important mass movement of Koreans across the border to non-Korean territory was the movement to Manchuria, to the territory Koreans used to call Kando, a border island. But the mass movement to Kando happened only in 1870s, late in 1880s. So the movement across Tumangan onto the Russian territory predated the movement across Tumangan and Amnokan into Qing dynasty's territory by around the factor of, say, 10, 15 years. So in this way, Korean migration to Russia was a very pioneering enterprise. So that was the first case of chosen subjects getting across the border and trying to build up their lives under the rule other than chosen dynasty's rule. In this way, it was a really pioneering enterprise. That's one important meaning of Korean diasporic experience in Russia, Soviet Union, post-Soviet land that we should be mindful about. Life on the territory of Russian Empire was difficult, often dangerous. We know the accounts about widespread khunhus, Manchu banditry also on Russian territory, the Russian Far East. It was a life under an absolutist government in Russia. It only became parliamentary monarchy from 1905. And it was often life of economical exploitation, aggravated by racial discrimination. We know that before the 1917 revolution, much of land in Russian forest was owned by Cossack settlers who had privileges in exchange for military service. So they used to rent this land to landless Korean migrants. They exploited them economically, but there were also lots of cases of ethnic violence, ethnic discrimination, and so on, and it all contributed to making Koreans a revolutionary minority after the 1917 revolution. So it was not an easy life. It was a life in which Koreans had to encounter exploitation and oppression. But at the same time, we see that the number of Korean residents in the Russian areas was steadily growing. There were around 16,500 people in 1892 when the status of Korean migrants in Russian Empire was regularized the year before that. But then, if you look into the statistic for was 106,800. So the number grew. It was less than the number of Koreans who lived at that time in Nigeria. However, if we think about other Korean communities abroad, it was a very the rest
Recording in progress.
The rest lived in Hawaii. So obviously it was a very prominent community numerically, but also given the constant increase in numbers. It gives us a sense that for many Koreans, especially in the northeastern, northern Hamgyong province, migration to Russia was in a way a dream which was also related to their aspirations to economical and social vertical mobility. Russia, the far eastern Russian areas were the place where one hoped one could earn some money, but also one hoped to be able to eventually buy land there and live a better life. This idea of going across a border to earn money, a sort of Russian Far East dream, this idea was still alive in the 1920s after the revolution. The border still remained very porous. I remember I worked recently on the Comintern archive documents on Hoson Chol. Hoson Chol was a Korean revolutionary in 1920s, 1930s, who then became a leader of Chonpyong, a progressive trade union federation in South Korea after the liberation, and then he went to North Korea, was a minister of labor, and then was purged. Hoson Chol wrote in his autobiography that his radicalization began after he illegally, just without having any documents, crossed to Russian Far East in 1925 in order to get a work there and earn some money. So obviously in mid-1920s, Russian Far East was still a place where Hangul people could go and earn some money if they were in economical difficulties. So in a way, you can compare it to what South Korea became to Russophone Koreans today. Again, a place where one can go and do some labor, earn money, and help oneself out of economic predicament. Now the roles are being reversed in a way. Yet another important pioneering feature of the Russo-Korean diaspora was the fact that Russia was among very few countries where migrant Koreans could also get citizenship. In 1891, Russian citizenship was offered to Koreans who moved to Russian Empire before 1884. So almost 13,000 Korean subjects were given Russian citizenship. Again, the figure is pretty small by our today's scale, by our today's standards. But we should remember that getting foreign citizenship in a, say, so-called Western country was not very easy for Korean migrants at that point. As I have said, there were around 6,000 Korean Americans by the year 1920. Only 1,000 of them lived in the continental United States, and the majority, those who were not born in America, were actually non-citizens. For non-whites, naturalizing in the United States was extremely difficult at that time. In certain cases, that was possible. We know, for example, that famous Korean-American leader, Soldier P. Philip Jackson, was a naturalized American. But certainly it worked in certain individual cases, but American citizenship was not bestowed enough in the way Russian citizenship was bestowed onto the Korean migrants, whom Russia at that point obviously needed because the Russian army units stationed in the Far Eastern area needed somebody to provide them with food, and the Koreans were supposed